what was the biggest surprise in Week 6 Sunday NFL? Was it A, which is the runaway winner right now, the Giants winning last night in Denver? Was it B, the Dolphins winning in Atlanta? Or was it C, the Bears winning in Baltimore? There are your choices. 68% say the Giants winning in Denver. 27% say the Dolphins winning in Atlanta. Just 3% say the Bears. John McMullen, was there something else that was a surprise, or to one of those three on the top of your surprise mantle as well?
Well, I think the Giants beating the Broncos on Sunday night definitely was the biggest upset of the weekend. Biggest surprise, you got to be surprised by Aaron Rodgers probably going down for the year, and that changes the landscape in the entire NFC. So, from an important standpoint, the fact that Rodgers isn't there is by far the biggest story. But certainly, I don't think Vance Joseph has to learn from that. He's a rookie head coach. His team didn't show up to play. And that's part of coaching. We always talk about with Doug Peterson. Everybody talks about X's and O's all the time. That's very, very important. You can't downplay that. But motivating your players and making sure they're ready to play every week is just as important, sometimes arguably more. And the Broncos simply weren't ready to play.
Johnny Mac, you brought up Rodgers. Let's go down that route, because do they stick with Hundley? They promoted Callahan, or do they start making phone calls? The obvious big names out there. You heard Romo's name. Kaepernick is obviously on the top of any list when someone needs a quarterback. More on him, obviously, happened yesterday. He filed a grievance claiming collusion. I don't know how that helps his chances of getting back into the league, but what do the Packers do? Stick with what they got or make phone calls?
No, I mean, has anyone talking about Colin Kaepernick to the Packers, has anyone paid attention to how Ted Thompson runs his ship? He doesn't sign free agents in the offseason. They build from within, and Brett Hundley's going to be the quarterback. They like him. Obviously, it's an issue. This is a organization, and more so the fan base, that is spoiled by a quarter century of consecutive Hall of Fame quarterback play. I don't think it's ever happened before for one organization. And now they're going to learn how the other half lives, the majority of this league, for the rest of this season. It's going to be tooth and nail, but there's no way they're going outside the organization. That includes Tony Romo as well. That's just not how the Packers do business, and that's part of the reason they are the Packers.
With that, you just heard Damian during the update say the Eagles are now the favorites in the NFC, according to the Vegas odds, 3-1 to win the NFC. With Rodgers going out, the way the Falcons are playing, I mean, Seattle's got offensive line issues. Dallas is still up in the air with the Ezekiel Elliott stuff, obviously lingering there. What did you learn about where Philadelphia is, even though they didn't play yesterday?
Well, I mean, it's a positive. You never like to see players injured, especially great players, and there's been far too many in this season, and this is just another indication. We had J.J. Watt and Odell Beckham last week. We have Rodgers this week, so it's not good for the league, but for the Eagles, I mean, there's no other way to look at it. This is a team that would have been very, very difficult come playoff time as an ounce, and now it's simply not. If he's unable to get back on the field, they're not even close to being a contender. So from that standpoint, obviously it helps the Eagles' chances immensely. And, yeah, I mean, if you look at the landscape, I said it early in the season. I'm not going to say I knew the Eagles were a great team, because I certainly didn't. But I did look at their roster and say they were the most well-rounded team in the NFC East. Now I think you can sort of expand that out and say at the very least, this is the most well-rounded team in the entire NFC.
Hey, John, how about the 4-2 Vikings and their quarterback situation? There's news that Bradford could be done maybe for his career. News today about Teddy Bridgewater coming off the PUP list. And then you still have Case Keenum. Are they a factor out there?
No, I don't think they are. They're very good defensively, but you need a quarterback to win in this league. And I think they'll win their share of games. I think they'll probably win that division now with Rodgers gone, but I think Case Keenum's going to be the quarterback. I think Sam's going to go on injured reserve eventually.
Wow.
And his career, yeah, I mean, he may never play again. That's how bad that knee injury is. And it's just wear and tear. It's just, and obviously if you saw him in Chicago on Monday night, didn't make it to the half, he couldn't move. He couldn't play. So I think ultimately that's an issue. And I think with Bridgewater, hey, it's a great story. He's back. He's going to be back at practice on Wednesday. But people, I don't understand. In a lesser degree, it's the same thing with Cindy Jones and the Eagles. I don't know why people assume the minute you're cleared for practice, you're ready to play in an NFL game. Teddy Bridgewater almost lost his leg 14 months ago. If it wasn't for Eric Sugarman, a former Andy Reid trainer, and his fast action, some people say he could have lost his life. That's how catastrophic that injury was. He's not going to be ready to play anytime soon.
Right.
So
similar to Luck, similar to Luck, who's been doing stuff at practice, but is nowhere near ready to play.
Exactly. I think there's this assumption that you're cleared and you're ready to go, and that's just not the case. And so from their standpoint, I mean, Case Keenum to me is one of the better backup quarterbacks in this league. I think he's already proven that. He's played essentially 5 games. He had the Vikings in position to win 4 of them. That's pretty good for a backup quarterback. But at the end of the day, he's a backup quarterback, and he's got limitations, size-wise, arm strength-wise, and that's going to be difficult to go all the way with a quarterback like that.
A lot of NFL news and notes on this Monday with John McMullen. Of course, you can read his national column at JF McMullen, FanRag Sports NFL, all his Eagles coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, let's look at this Kaepernick thing. He has filed a grievance under the latest CBA for collusion, which if he wins this, right, the CBA would be null and void, correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I chuckle because I think it's funny that you say if he wins this.
Right. This is pretty tough. This is pretty tough to prove.
Yeah, he's got about as much chance to win this as the. I don't know. Pick the Washington Generals do of having to win the NBA championship. That's about the extent of that. And Mark Daragos, who people know, he's very high profile lawyer. The only winner here is, I joked, is billable hours for lawyers because, Colin's got other things in his mind. And some of them, people look as good and he wants to be a social activist, and that's fine, and he wants to take on the NFL. So from that standpoint, Godspeed to him. But if anybody thinks he's winning this, they're crazy. I mean, there's no collusion. And B, even if there was, it's impossible to prove.
Right. This would be a pretty difficult thing to prove. That would basically insinuate that he had some sort of contact with virtually every team in the league and could have some sort of proof to say, in my dealing with all 32 teams, this was consistent throughout.
Yeah, and from a legal standpoint, there's 2 different definitions, and the one is obviously collusion between the commissioner and 32 teams. That's laughable. But there is a second one that you can more closely define it as just between, say, Roger Goodell and one team. That is the one they'll certainly argue. And Garagos himself used the word implied. So I asked Jeffrey Lurie this, and he was incredulous. And I said, if you look at certain owners, Jeffrey Lurie being one of them, Jed York being another who used to employ Colin Kaepernick, Paul Allen, there's a number of owners that are very, very liberal or progressive or whatever word you want to use in their politics. So it's laughable on the surface that there's collusion in this entire league with Colin Kaepernick. And I think people don't understand the definition of that word, and they assume because certain teams don't want to sign him for reasons that don't have to do with football, and that's undeniably true. That's not collusion. That's not even remotely near collusion. So I think, there's a lot of misinformation about this, and it's more of a grandstand ploy to keep, whatever he wants to keep alive.
Let me just ask you this, as a guy who's covered the league for a long time, are you surprised that 7 weeks in and with the amount of injuries there are that he's still not on a team?
No, because there's, as I said, there's context to every situation. And I always point out, if you name the team, I can explain the context.
Sure.
And people will talk about the Jets, and they'll say, well, they were trying to tank. Hasn't worked out for them. They've won too many games. But they didn't want to win games, and they didn't want to win 4 or 5 games. If you talk about San Francisco, well, they brought in Kyle Shanahan, who was bringing in, obviously, his offense. And if you know anything about his offense, he doesn't want a quarterback like Colin Kaepernick. He wants a quarterback like Matt Ryan. Now he's got neither, obviously. But the point is you can point out the context of each situation. And there are a number of reasons that the so-called, I like to call it, he's certainly one of the best 64 quarterbacks in the world.
Yes.
But I'll explain it like this. If you look at the Eagles roster, and constantly people talk about the best 53. That's not how you build a roster. That's why Donnell Pumphrey made the final roster. That's why Shelton Gibson made the final roster. Can Bryce Tregg say there was collusion because he was a better player than Shelton Gibson? No, of course not. Can Byron Marshall say it's collusion because the Eagles kept Donnell Pumphrey over him? There are other points of doing this, and certain organizations don't think he's a fit for their scheme. Certain organizations don't want him because of his social activism, no question about that. But it's sort of a potpourri of different things. What it isn't is collusion.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that a buddy and I were talking about the other day, because as you said, there's no question he's one of the top 64. In fact, he started last year, and his numbers would suggest he could be a starting quarterback. And they didn't win a whole heck of a lot in San Francisco. You can make a case he didn't have a lot of talent. But if you just flipped over the bubblegum card and said, look at my numbers, there's no question that he deserves an opportunity to play. My question really is, with all that is happening with the kneeling and the anthem, would a team get less backlash or more backlash based on what has happened since week 2?
For signing him?
Yeah.
Because
you seemingly have like this somewhat divide of some people supporting the players, other people turning their back to the players, and the people who are turning their back to the players have already seemingly turned their back on everybody, not just one person. So signing one guy doesn't seem like it would cause that much of an uproar as it would have if he was the only guy. Now there's multiple people doing what he did.
I think it would at this stage because of everything and now bringing the charges of collusion. Now I think it would be a bigger uproar.
Well, that's right. This certainly didn't help.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but you're only talking about a certain segment of the fan base. Another segment would be very excited and pushing for the fact. So it depends how you define it. Now, for me, I don't know why he is the face of this, especially being in Philadelphia. I have no idea why he is still the face of this when you have somebody like Malcolm Jenkins who does so many positive things and is such a better spokesperson for these types of issues. I don't know. I can't explain why either side wants to portray this guy as anything more than he was. And that was the point, remember, of wearing the socks with the pigs on the socks and just doing some very incendiary things instead of trying to be very, very positive in everything he does, which basically defines Malcolm Jenkins. But I guess that's where we are in society because, it's not necessarily the right thing to do. It's the sexy thing to do and what's going to get you more clicks and things of that nature, and that's the controversy that Colin Kaepernick brings.
John McMullen with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, his national column at FanRag Sports NFL. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. A lot of NFL stories from a wild week. A lot of injuries. Navarro Bowman, by the way, has agreed to a one-year deal with the Raiders. They need help on defense. They've been pretty bad. They lose again, 4 straight there. Also, we learned in regards to the Eagles this week, they'll be playing against a Redskins team that's going to be a little light-handed on the defensive side of the ball. Jonathan Allen suffered Liz Frank's sprain, so they're going to be missing their rookie defensive tackle there. As John, you mentioned, injuries seemingly were a big storyline in yesterday, but also we're getting close to the trade deadline as well, so you're starting to hear that kind of stuff. And in Pittsburgh, a team that finally broke out and won a big game yesterday, Martavius Bryant, a guy who's interesting because they stuck by this guy throughout his suspension, and then he turns around and says he wants to get out of there. Any buzz that we might see some deals at the trade deadline this year? It seemingly that there's been more in the NFL in recent years.
Yeah, I think we will for that reason. I think there's sort of a new breed of general manager that is more willing to do that. Howie Roseman is certainly in that club. He's one of the leaders of that club, but you have a lot of younger guys who are more open-minded, more willing to trade actual players than there have been in the old school, which there were barely any trades. So, I think that's the way the league is going. There is more movement. I don't think it's ever going to be baseball or basketball or anything of that nature, but you'll see certain guys, and Bryant would be one of them. I mean, Pittsburgh's had a lot of issues in the locker room, which is kind of a surprise if you think about their head coach, Mike Tomlin, and how well regarded he is, and that organization as a whole, and how they've always been sort of a leader in the fact how you run your program. So it's a little bit of surprise what's been going on in Pittsburgh, and I wouldn't be surprised if they decided to cut bait and move on because he hasn't been a big part of their offense anyway.
Hey, John, there were more blunders yesterday from NFL officials. I want to get your take on what happened with the Jets and the Patriots yesterday.
Well, I thought they made the right call, and I think it, again, is one of those plays that really highlights the over-legislation of this game and the rule book. It doesn't have to be that difficult. I always say give it the bar test. If 99 out of 100 people think it's a touchdown, it's probably a touchdown. And if Alberto Riveron was in the bar, that's a touchdown. But he's not. He's in the studio in New York, and they have these ridiculous rules. And he bobbled the ball going over the goal line, and he had to get control of it before going out of bounds. So by definition, they made the right call. The call is just stupid. The rule, is just stupid. And I think I've always said that. I've said that to Mike a lot of times because people get upset about officials. I think you'd be stunned how many times these guys get it right and what percentage they get it right for what they're asked to do. What people are really upset about is the rules themselves, and some of the rules are ridiculous. And this is another example of a ridiculous rule.
Does it look bad when the two guys that previously held that job, Pereira and Dean Blandino, both come out and say they would have not have overturned the score?
Yeah, it does. But there's been, it seems to be as guys get further around. Pereira, Blandino, he hasn't done it long enough to where I can get a good feel for him. Pereira generally gets it right. As far as what the league office thinks, he has in the past. So anytime he disagrees with something, I do raise a little bit of an eyebrow. But in this case, I think he's wrong from what the league defines it as. I think Riveron was correct. The Rodgers play, I mean, a lot of people are calling for that should have been a penalty. Pereira said it shouldn't. He explained it. I think he was right. I think a lot of people didn't realize because Rodgers was outside of the pocket, he lost quarterback protection. So he's just a running back at that stage of the game. And if you see that same hit on a running back, well, you're not even blinking an eye. So I do believe that was a legal hit. He generally gets it right. So, I think you're right to raise an eyebrow, Pete, but that ball was juggling as it crossed the goal line. So I think I think Alberto Riveron got it right. I just think the rule is a bad rule.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I didn't like it either.
That's my stance on that. I don't like it, and this is what I'm doing.
I think the Jets fans, I understand why they're so upset. I understand, but we talk about Des Bryant being that the famous play against the Packers in the playoffs, where he was basically that would have been one that went down as one of the great plays in NFL history, and at the end of it, after doing all this nonsense and flying Walenda stuff and making this spectacular play, he reaches out the football and he drops it at the very end. And it's just hard. It's a horrible rule, but they made the right decision. And nobody in the NFL can seem to understand that and why the people are upset and just make more common sense tweaks to these rules. But it's not changing. They continue to over-legislate things.
All right. Eagles back tomorrow. The media schedule is out. And tomorrow, speaking for the Eagles, you'll hear from Jim Schwartz and Frank Reich, as you do on Tuesdays. No media availability on Wednesday as normal. Doug Peterson Thursday. Actually, no. Peterson typically speaks on Wednesday. He's going to speak on Thursday this week. And then, of course, they play the Monday night game. So Friday practice. Saturday will be Peterson speaking instead of Friday like normal. And then the Eagles and Redskins right here. Monday night, the Countdown to Kickoff show this Monday coming up from PB's next Monday night for the Eagles and the Redskins. That coverage starts at 6 o'clock. John, take care, my friend.
Hey, thank you, guys.